Thank you for listening to the Conformed to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. I'm Jay Jones, here with George Mays for a text-driven Tuesday, and we're back in Hebrews chapter 2. If you have your Bible, you'll want to grab your Bible, go to Hebrews chapter 2. We are finishing out chapter 2. Today's focus will be on verses 14 through 18 in a sermon that, George, you entitled, Why the God-Man?
There it is. Yep.
So why the title? I'll ask you that.
I took it from Anselm of Canterbury's work by the same name, though it was in Latin.
Okay.
I almost titled it the Latin, but decided that would...
Anselm of Canterbury.
That might have been a little pretentious.
What, I can't remember the years that he lived.
He was the 11th century.
Okay, yeah.
He died at the beginning of the 12th century.
That makes sense because that the moral influence, right? Moral influence theory, was that the one? Moral example was in response to him. That's it. We were talking about it in Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
Canterbury.
Yep.
England?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he has a work called Why the God-Man, in which he is arguing for the necessity of Christ to be both fully God and fully man.
Yeah, that's making sense, yeah.
And so he just walks through this argument.
Because this Socinian guy, I believe the people that followed after him began to deny that Jesus was God.
Okay.
So this makes sense that he would start to emphasize this.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So what did he say? Well, because it did fit in really well with this text.
Right.
So,
yeah. So I've got I found some bullet points of his argument.
Yeah.
And he just, I mean, it's very similar to what we talked about last week from verses 5 through 13. Man was created to experience blessedness. But through the fall, we don't experience that. In order for man to experience this, his sin has to be dealt with. Only God can deal with man's sin, but it's not his.
Because he's the offended party.
But he's not, well, because he's the only one who has the power to do it. But it's not his debt.
Right.
Like it's not his sin. He's the offended party. He's not the one who ought to deal with it. It's man's debt, so he's the one who ought to, but he can't because he's. How do you atone for sin?
Right.
As a fallen man, you can't atone for sin. So you have to have a God-man. And if man was meant to experience eternal blessedness and he somehow fails to attain that, then God he's failed somewhere. And it's impossible for God to fail in his purposes. Therefore, the God-man has to come and deal with sin. So as the God-man, Jesus takes upon himself true humanity, so he's the one who ought to deal with it, because as a man, he can deal with mankind's sin, but as truly God, he's able to. And so you have both natures coming together in one person who can actually deal with the sin problem.
All right, yeah. And so you gave 3 reasons why Son of God had to become a man and how we can have hope from that. So I think this is a good proposition statement because verse 17 has the word had to in it. And so tell us what that means. Verse 17 says, he had to be made like his brothers. Is there any significance to that? Because I think there obviously is, but I want to hear you say it. And then it fits in with your proposition. So I'm trying to help people to see if someone's doing expository preaching, things like this should shape those statements.
I'm trying to get better at this myself.
Yeah.
In trying to, it's so easy to fall into this trap of trying to be clever
Mm-hmm.
and trying to be, look at me. I come up with some kind of provocative statement that grabs your attention. I'm really trying to get a lot better at using the words that are just in the text.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why go for another word when I can just use the word in the text so you can actually see it and you can say, oh yeah, it's right there. So I'm really trying to be intentional about that. So that word had, it fits in with the whole theme of what's going on here. It draws us back to Anselm's argument that he had to be the God-man.
Mm-hmm.
If he was going to actually deal with sin, it had to be this way.
Okay.
This wasn't just, God had three options and he was like, well, here's the pros and cons of this one and the pros and cons of this one and the pros and cons of this one. I'll pick this one.
Right.
No, this is it. This is the only way. And so he had to be made like his brothers.
Okay. We'll dig a little more into it when we get there.
That word, it carries the connotation of obligation.
Uh-huh.
It actually is
But don't tell
translated
us
that
yet.
way.
Don't
Okay,
Don't tell us yet.
Okay,
Why he's obligated
okay.
for it.
So that's the connotation that it carries.
I gotta hold on to it so that people will listen for the duration.
Right. It's translated, and that's not that's not some kind of the Greek words they can, depending on the context, they can carry a certain meaning, but it's translated as obligation in chapter 5.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look at chapter 5 and you'll see the obligation. It's the same word.
All right, good. So you got 3 reasons why the Son of God had to become a man, and how we can have, was it hope? The word hope that you used? Yes, that we can have hope from this. So number 1, well, first off, let's have you read the text.
Okay.
How about that? People
All
might be
right.
like, can we understand?
Right.
Can we hear?
Okay.
We're driving in our car. Can we hear the text
Okay.
that you guys are talking about?
Yeah.
So could you read this for us? This is Hebrews chapter 2, beginning of verse 14.
Okay. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted.
Good. All right. So 3 reasons why the Son of God had to be. He had to be made like us, had to become a man, and how that can give us hope. All right, number 1, your first reason, to destroy the power the devil has over you. So the first reason you have is to destroy the power the devil has over you, and I think you can see that pretty clearly there in the text as we're reading. It's just right out there in the open. He had to be made. He had to take on flesh and blood. He himself likewise partook of the same things, so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. So, question, what does flesh and blood mean? Like, is this just a way of saying he had a human body, or what?
I think it's a catch-all.
Okay.
It is a shorthand way of saying everything that is essential to humanity.
Mm-hmm.
We see this later on down in verse 17. He had to be made like his brothers in every respect.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not. We don't want to read it as he just has a flesh body and everything else is divine. So we've talked about this before. We talked about it a little bit last week.
We talked about it on Free for All with William Lane Craig's.
Yeah. He is made like a human in every respect, and that's important because if he's not, we run into some very major problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that when we come across that word flesh and blood in regards to the incarnation, we need to understand that it's just shorthand. They're not laying out, all the different aspects of what it means to be a human, but that's a catch-all.
Mm-hmm.
So we share in flesh and blood by reason of our nature. We're born into this world with a human body. We have a soul. We have a human mind. We have a human will. We've got emotions. Everything that it means to be a human. That's what we come into the world having. And then Jesus himself, he partook of those things. So not by reason of his nature, but by reason of his choice to enter into our humanity. He took all of those things in the incarnation.
Yeah, that's good. And we've hashed out a number of ways that we have to affirm that Jesus is truly a man in every way: human mind, will, body, soul, all of that.
Yeah, I wrote down, we didn't have time to go through these. I didn't intend for us to go through them. I wrote down, I just listed all of the different heresies that the early church had to deal with in their creeds.
There's a lot
in regards to the incarnation, because there were a bunch of them.
Yeah.
That they had to deal with his deity with the Arian controversy, but his humanity, that took a lot longer. There was a lot of other different ideas about what it meant for him to be a man.
Because in many of them, they kind of in a accidental way end up denying that he is in every respect,
right?
Like us, yet without sin. So here's one that I maybe could see. We haven't talked about it, but I could see how people would have this question. Did Jesus, did he ever get sick?
I've heard that question.
Now here's those in the, I think more of the continuationist charismatic camp, that not all of them obviously, because they're not monolithic, but many in that they would see sickness as a result of sin. So they would just say, no, Jesus never got sick. Now here's me, and I'm open to be corrected, and I haven't read enough on particularly in Jesus in this way, but as I have read a lot about suffering and the problem of evil, and as far as I can see, Jesus suffered in every other way a human can suffer, other than us being told he's sick.
Okay.
Right? So he's got psychological pain and physical pain, and the only ones left is to have pain from being sick. And I don't see sickness happening to you. Of course, you can get sick because you sin and cause yourself to get sick, but there's a component we get sick all the time, and we had nothing to do with it.
Right.
We just live in a fallen world.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that would preclude him from getting sick. It's not a sin to get sick.
So he has
he has a body. Yeah, he has a body. He is a person, right? He has a specific DNA from his mother.
Right.
He looked like her, I'm sure.
Right.
Like they could look at him and be like, "Oh yeah, I see how he resembles his mother," because he has the same DNA. He has the genes.
Joseph's just over here.
That's right.
Looking like that that puppet, that meme puppet.
You would expect that he would look similar to his brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so he's really a person, but he doesn't sin. So he doesn't have he's unfallen, but he lives in a fallen world,
right? And
so he's going to experience the effects of living in a fallen world. So you have to understand that he is a unfallen human in a fallen world,
right?
And
if he fell down, he'd get cut,
right? The temptations that would lead to, here is the superiority of Christ to Adam. Adam was unfallen in an unfallen world, and he still sinned. Jesus is unfallen in a fallen world,
Right.
and he doesn't sin. The superiority, like the difference between the two, he is not just another Adam; he is a greater Adam, who succeeds in every way that Adam doesn't. And so I don't see anything that we would say he couldn't get sick. He's a kid, right?
Sure,
Like
that's
a 2-year-old who runs around with other 2-year-olds. I don't know. I mean,
pass stuff around.
they pass stuff around. And he didn't sin in the midst of getting sick. That's
you really
to
have to
Adam.
prove. I think to say Jesus never got sick, you have to prove that getting sick is a result of your sin.
Right.
I just don't think that's a case you can make.
Yeah.
It'd be like saying every time somebody dies in a car wreck, it's because they deserved it.
Right.
They're just things that happen because we live in a fallen world that have nothing to do with your sin at all. It just has to do with the result of sin ruining the environment.
I mean, are you saying that he never got, some fish that had been left out too long and, had a stomach bug or something? Did he? I mean, it's not a sin, right? But he lives in a fallen world. Is he immune? Could he just eat lamb that had been left out for a couple of days and not get sick?
All the disciples are like, we can't eat it, but
you can eat it. Right?
Yeah, you're good.
It doesn't really make any sense. That would seem to fall into one of these heresies.
Well, there's got to be
he's not truly a human because he's immune to all of these things.
Well, he definitely wasn't, immune, like I said, to having psychological pain inflicted on him by being betrayed or slandered and all of these things.
Yeah.
He didn't deserve any of those things, and yet he experienced all that type of suffering. So it's interesting to think about. I just thought that's a sidebar people might be curious about.
Yeah.
But there are people most definitely that will tell you if you got sick, it's because there's some sin in your life. I don't believe that.
So this is jumping to the end, and I don't want to spend too much time there because we'll get there. But just front loading it with, you can't say that Jesus doesn't know what it's like to be a human. His incarnation was not superficial; it was real. He actually was and still is a man. He's glorified now, but he still has a human body. But he was a man. This was not, we're not just paying lip service to this. It wasn't just this gloss over. He really was a person with everything that entails. And we've talked about this over and over and over again. We're really solid on Jesus is fully God, but we really struggle with what it means for him to truly be a man. And I think if we really think about that, and we realize what that means, that when I go through this stuff, Jesus has gone through stuff like this too, and he has had to learn obedience through suffering. That should give us some encouragement. Like we have someone who has experienced these things, and he has overcome. So I can look to him when I struggle.
Yeah, huge. It's huge. Okay. I thought that would be interesting, something to deal with on here. That's kind of what we do on this stuff. So, all right, the next question. What power does the devil have? Because this text seems to imply he had, past tense, some type of power over humanity. And it's related to death. Right. So let's go through and do kind of what you did.
Okay.
What is it not, and what is it, you think? So what is it? What is it not?
Okay, so the first, and this is, I mean, you read the commentaries, and they ask these questions, like they're running through this because there's disagreement on what this means. What does it mean that the devil had the power of death? So the first thing that we need to just get off the table is that Jesus had to pay a ransom to the devil. So this is called the ransom theory. I know you're going to cover that in Sunday school. So this I'm not sure when this arose, Middle Ages.
It's kind of one of those things you just kind of scratch your head, like, where did it come from?
Yeah. The only place I can think of is it would come from maybe this verse.
Maybe.
I can't really think of any other place. So
Yeah.
the idea is that,
Or
and
he gave his life
think
as a ransom for many.
maybe. So my wife and I were talking about this a little bit, and you can still kind of see it's not exactly the ransom theory, but you can kind of see this still in some of those charismatic circles where they teach that Jesus had to die and go to hell, and Joyce Meyer and Joel Osteen, they tell these fantastical stories of Jesus getting into this fight with the devil, and he's dragging the devil around, humiliating him in hell, and so he had to get the keys, and they treat these keys like they're actual literal keys that
Gave him the stone cold stunner.
yeah
Bam.
that's right.
Took the keys.
Yeah. So you kind of still see some of this, but this idea of the ransom theory is that through Adam and Eve's sin, they have pretty much lost the title deed to earth to the devil, and even the Word of Faith people, they'll treat it as if God can't even do anything
Right.
in this world now because of sin.
Sure. I've heard them say that. I mean,
yeah. So Jesus has to come, and he has to actually pay a ransom to the devil.
There's that radio station here that what do you remember the station number? But it's pumped out of this big church here in Lawton. They're connected with Kenneth Copeland. Was it Jesus? It's like Jesus is Lord.
Jesus is
Church.
Lord Church. Yeah,
But they're big, man. They're not like a small
Right.
deal. There's a lot of people, and I've heard him say like God isn't sovereign. Because he gave sovereignty to man when he made man, and we gave it over to the devil.
Right.
So we've got to take it back now. Of course, you need to know their power words and be able to speak. There's power and authority in men's ability to speak. So I could see that this would be connected in a way to what they believe. It's so strange, though.
Yeah, and there's we want to do justice to passages in the scripture. I mean, Paul talks about the God of this world has blinded their eyes. Jesus even says the ruler of this world, but he says it in the context of the ruler of this world is cast out through the work of the cross. So we want to, do the work of understanding some of these passages. We don't want to be lopsided on this, but the idea that Jesus actually has to pay a ransom to the devil just has no warrant in the scriptures. The devil's not the offended party, and God hasn't lost his authority because of the devil. This is all part of God's sovereign plan. And so Jesus isn't coming to somehow pay the devil off so that he gives it back.
So weird.
God is the one who is offended by man's rebellion, and so the payment has to be given to God, not some kind of third party.
It's so weird. It's such a weird theory. It's almost like a movie where, this guy's got a hostage, and then the parents are like, "We'll pay the ransom, but there's a surprise. We actually keep the ransom." Like God has a resurrection. It's like, "Ha,
right?
Fooled you, devil.
Yeah,
I got all the people and Jesus back."
Well, so it's
so weird.
Well, you hear some people talk this way, like the devil thought that he was going to win, and Jesus tricked him into doing this, and it's just there's just some bizarre things that people believe.
Yeah. So that doesn't mean that.
But it doesn't mean the ransom theory.
How about I like the one like this one that you brought up. Does it mean that the devil could just like kill people?
Right.
He had the power of death. Does he like
right
and just walk around
and kill people,
dropping people?
Yeah, I use that example from when I was in seminary. I was leading some kind of discipleship training Bible class for the senior adults on Sunday nights, and we heard of a seminary student who was out for a jog, and he just died. I don't know if he had a heart attack or if he had an aneurysm, but he just died on a jog. just unexpectedly, a young guy just dying unexpectedly. And when I was talking about it to this group, one of the older women said, "Well, that wasn't God. That was the devil that did that." That's kind of a scary thought.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why anyone would want to believe something like that.
Yeah.
The devil is just out there, and he can just
Right.
kill you. He can just kill you
Right,
whenever he
yeah.
wants to. I mean, if he's grumpy one day, there's Jay.
Yeah.
Just gonna kill him.
Yeah.
That's kind of this worldview idea that there's this God's on one side, the devil's on the other, and they're having like this cosmic tug of war,
Mm-hmm.
and it just goes back and forth.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. People
like to believe that in this dualistic world, this dualistic universe where the devil is just the equal opposite of God.
Yeah, people have a strange view about the devil and God. So they invest the devil with he's supernatural, but they make him like
They make him a god.
They make him like the biggest, most they make him like another god.
He's got all this power. He's got unlimited power. He's omniscient,
omnipresent. He's everywhere all the time. There's no evidence that he's omnipresent at all.
No.
He has to go around to and fro. Job talks about that. He can't do whatever he wants. He brought that up. Job, God tells him what he can do, what he can't do. He has to obey God.
And he cannot kill Job without God's permission.
It's weird. And then coupled with that, people have this strange view of God too. I've even heard people say they're uncomfortable with how many people God kills in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And what he commands
right.
Israel to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you don't realize that God kills everybody?
Yeah.
There's not a single human that has survived. I mean, there are 3, I guess. There's Jesus, Enoch.
Jesus dies though.
Jesus did die, rose from the
Jesus
dead.
dies. He's not. It's not. He didn't get a pass.
You got Elijah and Enoch, I guess. You got 2. Everybody dies because we are in a fallen world. This flesh cannot inherit immortality.
Right.
Who do you think is in charge?
Yeah.
God just passively? No, this is a result of the curse that God cursed this earth, and he's in charge of all of this. And if he says your time's up, you're not living another second.
Right.
But I don't know why you would want to live another way, though. I mean, we get, you're sick, and if you don't believe God is in total control of that, you just, how anxious. It would make me so anxious. I don't know that I could.
I mean, if you believe that the devil has the power to kill people or make them sick just on his own authority, his own will, like you said, there's so little hope. How is that encouraging? That, well, God's doing the best he can, but there's a devil out there, and he might kill you.
I had a wonderful plan for your life, but he got you before I could.
Right.
But I'll get him next time.
It's like this cosmic game of chess.
Yeah.
That's not what the Bible presents. That's not. I refuse to believe that's what it means, that the devil has the power of death. Yeah. When you read Job chapter 2, and God says you can take his health away from him, but you cannot take his life. Mm-hmm. The devil is, like Martin Luther said, the devil is God's devil. Mm-hmm. He's on a leash. He can't just do whatever he wants. God, he's a secondary means that God uses to accomplish his purposes, but the devil can't just go rogue and do whatever he wants to do. Mm-hmm. God, he's within a fence, and he can't go beyond what God allows him to do.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the second thing that I would say. That's not what it means that he has the power of death.
Okay. So what do you think it means?
I think it's in the word that's used. Like, there's other words that could have been used here, but he uses the word devil. Mm-hmm. That word it's not his name, right? I think we often think that's his name. He's not Mr. Devil, right? It's not what he puts down on his tax forms. Yeah, come on, sure. Jay, you're...
I was just thinking about the other bizarre names.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about all the other names that people think are his name.
Right.
And they're just not.
Lucifer?
Yeah, Lucifer. That's one.
Right.
Not a Mr. Lucifer.
Yeah. So that means accuser.
Right.
He is the adversary. He's the accuser. I think that's what it means that he has the power of death. So he's the one that, at his instigation, he incited Adam and Eve to rebel against God, which brought death into the world. But now the devil accuses people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it means that he has the power of death. That the wages of sin is death. You are guilty of sin. The consequence of your sin is death, and the devil stands ready to accuse you.
Mm-hmm.
He stands ready to point the finger at you and say, "This one deserves to die."
Mm-hmm.
And it hangs over our head because the devil's right. Like the devil is not wrong in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
The story that I kept picking from was Zechariah chapter 3, where Joshua the high priest it's this courtroom vision. Joshua is standing there in filthy robes before God, the judge. And there's the devil. He's standing there accusing him. Joshua is representing the people, and the people are guilty of sin. The devil is pointing his finger at him and saying, "Throw the book at him." I think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the condemnation that the devil justly accuses us of.
Mm-hmm.
He's the prosecuting attorney, and the bad news is that all the evidence is on his side. I mean, he proves his case beyond a reasonable doubt, and so you deserve the death penalty. I mean, you think of a courtroom where the prosecuting attorney, the DA is seeking the death penalty. They have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury has to say it has to be unanimous, and it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And the devil does it. He prosecutes you beyond a reasonable doubt. You're guilty.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeking the death penalty.
Yeah. And I think the power, how this works for the Christian, I was kind of thinking about this today as well. And people might think, well, why do we die if we're Christians? Well, the wages of sin is death. This is the way I thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
We can hash it out maybe. The wages of sin is death. You physically have sinned in this body. You're part of the fallen world. Everyone's going to die. Everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
The difference is Christ has died and rose from the dead and overcome death.
Right.
So where this makes the difference, how the power of death is taken away by Christ, is that the danger of death is if it seals finally your fate of being separated from God. You're separated from God in your sin,
Mm-hmm.
and if you die in that state, you're separated from God forever. So death is incredibly scary and powerful.
Yep.
And people are afraid of death. I don't care what they say. And the reason that they are afraid is because they know there's some power, I think, even if they can't articulate it correctly, they know there's a moral authority outside of themselves that they'll face.
Mm-hmm.
So how the power of death is removed then is that you know you will die, but you're united in Christ's death.
Yep.
So though your body physically dies, you don't die.
Right.
You temporarily pass on to the intermediate state, awaiting the resurrection of the dead.
Yeah. And what is the fate for all unbelievers?
The second death.
The second death.
Yeah.
Right. And the second death has no power over the believer because of Christ.
Yeah.
We experience eternal life. Those outside of Christ, including the devil, experience eternal death.
Yeah.
I imagine the devil trying to take you down with him. Like he knows I'm guilty too. This is my fate, but I'm going to take as many of you as I can. But Jesus rips you out of his grasp. He has no power over you. Because Jesus is the defense attorney. And he's not just the defense attorney, he's the evidence. He's the evidence in your favor. He has died, and you are clothed in his righteousness.
Yeah,
and so you are guilty. But because of the righteousness of Christ that clothes you, which again, where you can look at Zechariah chapter 3 and you see the same picture going on, that Joshua's dirty robe is taken off and he's given clean robes. And the angel of the Lord is standing by watching the entire thing. I think that's Jesus. He's standing there, and he is standing there defending Joshua. And he's the reason why Joshua can be justified.
Yeah.
And that's the same for Christians.
Yeah.
Because of Christ, there is no condemnation for them. So
Yeah,
the devil,
there's now no condemnation.
There's now no condemnation. And I love Revelation chapter 12, where it talks about this war in heaven, and the devil is actually thrown down.
Mm-hmm.
And heaven erupts in praise because the devil, who accused the brethren day and night, has been thrown down.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the work of Jesus, the devil doesn't have he has no evidence anymore.
Mm-hmm.
His accusations, they've just been brought to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus has broken his power.
Mm-hmm. I like what Jesus says in John chapter 5. He says this. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life."
Mm-hmm.
The emphasis on possessing it now,
right?
Not waiting for it sometime later. You get it, and your physical body's going to die, but that you possess eternal life. So
right.
It's just something that happens to you as you are passing into a greater state.
Yeah.
And then he says, he does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life.
Right.
And that's because he's stripped away the power of death has.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone. It's removed. And if you're in him, yes, your body's going to physically die. You can't inherit immortality.
Right.
That's what Paul tells us. Goes into the ground. But the power of it should be removed. And in the great example you gave, where it was the disciples,
mm-hmm.
there's no other explanation
right.
that can be given as to why these men are now they're fearless now. They're afraid, they're running, they're cowards, and now they're like totally bold and totally fearless. I mean, just imagine, what do authorities threaten you with? Like,
right.
That's the nature of authorities, right? The one who has the sword or has the gun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they can threaten your life,
right?
And that's very powerful to control people.
I think it was Justin Martyr. He said, they can kill us, but they can't hurt us.
Yeah.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Like once they threaten you with death, and you're like, bring it on. What else can they do to you?
Right.
What else can they do? They can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Polycarp? Yeah, it was Polycarp that was standing before the Roman judge, and he was like, "Don't you know that I can throw you to the wild beast?" And Polycarp's like, "Do it." I can burn you up. It just has nothing. It has no impact on Polycarp, because he says, "Do you not know who I am? I'm a Christian." Let me tell you who I am. You got to look up the story of Polycarp. You got to read the story of Polycarp before the judge, because it's so great.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy he's 80 years old. He's like this crotchety old man before this Roman judge. And the judge is like, all you got to do is say, "Away with the atheist, and I'll let you go free."
Meaning the Christians.
Yeah.
Because they deny the pantheon of Roman gods.
And he looks around at all the Romans, and he says, "Away with the atheists." I mean, this guy is great. This guy deserves the label of hero of the faith, because he's just fearless. And it's not because of something in Polycarp. It's because he served Christ, and he knows that Christ has never failed him, and he's not going to fail him in his death.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes to his death. He goes to his death fearlessly.
Yeah.
And that's the way that we should also.
Yeah.
Because death doesn't have any power over us anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, that kind of bled over into the second point.
A little bit. Yeah. And so I think that's obvious how that can give us hope.
Yeah.
Right.
And it also
reasons to persevere.
Yeah. If the power of the devil is gone, the condemnation is not there anymore. We can live fearless lives. We can have hope.
Mm-hmm.
When the devil accuses us, we can plead the blood of Christ.
Yeah.
And we don't have to fear the accusations of the devil.
Mm-hmm.
we just continuously run to Christ and trust in Him, and we believe the promises of God, and we can have that assurance of pardon that we talk about every Sunday. And that shuts the devil's mouth.
Yeah.
There's no there's no answer to that. Christ has died, and we've died with Him.
Yeah. So your second point was right. We did jump into it early, but we just couldn't resist, I guess. It's in verse 15. The second reason is to deliver you, that the second reason Jesus had to become a man, in every respect we are, is to deliver you from the fear of death, which grips you. And people are afraid of death.
Yeah, they are.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
You see it everywhere today.
I mean, it's just come front and center the last couple of years, right? I mean, everyone is afraid of death. There's a reason why people are willing to do just whatever they're told, whether it's stay in your home, let grandma die by herself in the nursing home, send your 5-year-old to kindergarten with a mask on her face, don't meet for holidays, stay away from her family. We talked about Fauci when he said he hadn't hugged his daughter in over a year.
Yeah.
People are willing to do that. Why? Because they're afraid of getting sick and dying. That's the whole thing. They are terrified of dying.
Yeah, they are. I mean, and it's nothing new. This amplified it. It's just been amplified big time. It makes people irrational even.
Yeah.
And people will do things that are irrational.
Right.
The example I use all the time because I love baseball is Ted Williams, the greatest greatest hitter maybe of all time.
Yep.
And he has his body and his head frozen.
Yeah.
In this place called Alcor Labs. Now this place is super shady. I mean, there was like a 60 Minutes done on this place.
Yeah.
I think his head is only a couple people have actually seen his head, and I think it's like all cracked and stuff.
Didn't they had some kind of problem with it, didn't they?
They did, yeah. They're cryo because this is like this is more like sci-fi than science, But his belief was, if they freeze me,
right,
they can resurrect me when science catches up and can have immortality.
Right,
that's the idea.
At least his head can. Right.
But there's all kinds of...
He's just a head in a jar.
Yeah, he could be, maybe stick him on a robot body. Elon Musk is working on that, right? He's working on chips that help us integrate in with machinery.
Yeah.
So maybe Ted Williams would get one, and he can start hitting dingers again in his machine body, hit a ball 600 feet.
They may have his body and his head frozen somewhere, but I would 100% guarantee his soul is not coming back.
Right.
He's already gone to his reward.
What if they resurrect Ted Williams' body and he's the beast of Revelation? They erect an image to the beast, and that he sustained a head wound, and they all start to.
Oh my God!
And now everyone starts to worship Ted Williams, and the mark is like a baseball tattoo. Have too much fun on here, man. But more serious.
It's time for you to write that book, Jay.
Yeah. I could write a killer book with Ted Williams as the main character, as the villain.
Yeah.
The resurrected Ted Williams. Probably face a lawsuit from his family or something. Oh man.
Yeah. Where were we going with this?
So
the fear of death, right?
Yeah,
people do whatever they can to escape it.
But today, even like that's extreme. But rich people, they really think that they're going to crack the code through human genetics, because it's like your body has wired a time machine in it to make sure you don't live forever.
Yeah.
Your telomeres, we talked about this before. They shorten as you get older.
Yeah.
And when they shorten and they're gone, your cells can't replicate anymore in a healthy way, and just errors start happening. And they just think that they can crack this code, and they can't. They're not going to.
Death it's unnatural. Like that's not how God originally intended mankind to live. But after the fall, death is both a curse, but it's also God's grace. I mean, you see that in Genesis chapter 3. He bars the way to the tree of life, lest they live forever. I mean, can you imagine living forever as a fallen person in a fallen world.
Right.
Like God's grace to you is that you don't live in this world forever. But yeah, there's people are so afraid of it, and I agree with you. That even the most hardened atheist is afraid of death. They don't live consistently with their worldview that there's nothing after this. They're still intent on preserving their life,
Right.
because they intrinsically know that there's something after death. There is judgment. God has built that into the human conscience, and
Eternity
you
is in
can't
the heart
escape
of man.
Right? You can't escape it, and so you're terrified of it. Rather than repenting and running to the God who gives life, they want to try to hold on to this life no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you'll see people, they'll just do all kinds of crazy things to hold on to life.
I think Christians die probably like Jesus died, in trusting himself. And obviously these Roman centurions they'd killed a lot of people, seen a lot of people die. There's something special about the way he died.
Yeah.
And that really had a big impression on them.
Right.
They said, I've never seen anyone die like this. And I bet you if you did a study of hospital staff, you would ask them who dies in the most beautiful death, and they would probably say it's the Christians. Because, the people come, they sing hymns around you.
Right.
Your family's there. You're not afraid, and you die.
Right.
I bet that if you were to do that study, that's what you would discover. So
get on that, Jay.
I don't think I'll do that, man. I've got some books you want me to write that I've got to get.
The head of Ted Williams.
I actually thought of another book that maybe I think maybe we could do some co-writing on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like, well, you'd have to get into systematic theology. I know you love biblical theology. Maybe we'll make it a series of books, huh? Systematic theology for the regular church guy and girl in a post-apocalyptic Christian America.
Okay.
Huh?
Yeah.
No.
It's just like the survival handbook once China invades.
One thing I don't like about systematic theology is they're just not they're not good at making application. I always try to do that in the class.
Right.
Hopefully that comes out.
Yeah.
But this stuff does have like real life applications.
Right.
And the books are just so gigantic, and they they never really deal with application.
Yeah.
That no regular church person is going to read those.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I really wanted to do as I was going through Hebrews. We're talking about big things. Like, we're talking about the incarnation. How many pages would you guess is devoted to an incarnation, the incarnation in a big systematic theology? A lot, right?
And there's whole books. I mean,
yeah. They write gigantic books on this issue, and it can often be viewed as this stuffy, unimportant doctrinal stuff, and we can disagree. There can be one guy who's a neo-Apollinarian over here, and another guy who's not, and it's just a matter of opinion. It has real world implications,
right?
Like, the writer of Hebrews is not writing some kind of systematic theology. He's writing to Christians that are experiencing real hardship, and he's saying, this is how you have hope. This is how you live and persevere in the midst of this tribulation. Jesus was made like you in every respect.
That's your third point.
Yeah.
That's how, and this is where it gets very practical, right? To become a merciful, faithful high priest. That's point 3.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets real practical.
Right.
That's where the rubber meets the road. And you emphasize here, because the text does, he doesn't help the angels.
Yeah.
It's an important thing that's an important thing to understand.
So this is the last time that we'll be hitting on angels, until we get to Hebrews 12, I think. I don't think he talks about angels anymore. So we've been talking about angels for the last 2 chapters. This is the last time that he really emphasizes angels, and he says Jesus doesn't help angels. That's something to really step back and think about. These are sentient beings. Like, they're personal. got names. They have personalities. They talk. They're intelligent. They live forever. And a percentage of them rebelled against God and followed Satan, and they're going to spend eternity in the lake of fire. And there's no redemptive plan for them.
You know what's strange is I can foresee. I already know this. You know it too. Anybody that has lived for the last 25 years knows that when people hear you say that, what they'll say is, "That's not fair."
Yeah,
that's not fair. Like, why won't God save the angels?
Right.
Like, He should save them. Poor angels.
Poor angels. Yeah.
They never say they deserve it.
Right.
You can't say poor God, but what you should say is, how dare they offend God?
I've never heard a single person say it's not fair that the devil doesn't have an opportunity to get back into God's good graces. He's gone. Like
right.
he is lost forever.
Yeah.
There's no redemptive plan for Satan.
Mm-hmm.
He fell, and he will one day be thrown into the lake of fire, and he'll be there forever.
Mm-hmm.
There is no plan of salvation for him. There is no Romans road.
He's getting justice.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is to think is, okay, angels fell, they get what they deserve.
Right.
Humanity fell, and it's not the same.
Yeah.
Like God would be totally just to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You now get what you deserve as well.
Right. And there didn't have to be a plan of redemption for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But there is. There is the Son of God. He did not take on an angel body to save the angels. He took on a human body to save humans.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going on here in verse 16. Surely it's not the angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham.
Yeah. So it narrows. You said the language here narrows. He helps the offspring of Abraham, and he had to make us like his brothers. So let's kind of get at that. Let's try to get at that. There's a narrowing there that's in the passage.
Yeah. And we talked about this last week, but we really see it here.
Mm-hmm.
That the author could have easily said, but he helps humans, or he helps mankind, he helps humanity, he helps everyone, right? But he doesn't. He says he helps the offspring of Abraham. And even that word help, it's the same word that was used in Jeremiah chapter 31, where God says that I helped your fathers when I brought them out of Egypt, when I took them out of Egypt. It carries the connotation of grabbing. It's an actual rescue. It's not just a helping hand. It's I took hold of them and I rescued them, like God did out of Egypt. So he actually helps. He actually grabs hold of the offspring of Abraham. So this is a definite salvation. This is not I did everything I could, but they just didn't want to. They didn't want to come along. That's not what that word actually carries.
Kind of the
meaning.
Picture that I got when you were describing this word is that being grabbed and taken away. Is I saw this TikTok. I know we're waiting for it, George. George, I'm going to keep watching TikTok now just so I can see you roll your eyes. So this guy jumps. See, now you can use this illustration in future sermons because I watch TikTok.
Okay.
You're welcome. This guy, there's a dog some mean person has tied up to a train track. It's going to get like smashed, like run over. A train's coming.
Okay.
And these people are standing around, and all of a sudden, this guy jumps out from these people, and he jumps down the train track. And they're like, "Don't do it! What are you doing?" And like he starts to like untie this thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Get out of there! You're gonna get run over." He unties the thing, grabs the dog, and jumps out of the way right before the train comes by. And that's the picture I get.
Right.
Like you're going to get smashed.
Yeah.
God's wrath is coming down the train tracks.
Right.
And Jesus jumps down and snatches you out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
He pulled you out. He helped you.
Yeah.
So now the question is,
who's he doing this for?
It's descriptive. Yeah. Who's he snatching out of God's wrath?
Right.
Because he says the offspring of Abraham.
It's offspring of Abraham.
So you got to ask this question then.
Who
are the offspring of Abraham? Who are they?
Yeah. Fortunately, the New Testament doesn't leave us in suspense. It
Well,
tells us
the Pope,
who it is.
the
right?
Pope, since it's Reformation month.
Yeah.
I have Reformation month. I don't know about you. Reformation month, October.
Yeah.
He's trying to build this like Children of Abraham place in Dubai. You heard about this?
I haven't.
Okay, so the Pope's involved on this. Shocker. He's the Children of Abraham, or the House of Abraham, I think it's called.
Okay.
It's this like property in Dubai where there will be people that worship together in vicinity of each other. There'll be like a synagogue, a mosque.
Okay. Well, I heard.
and a
I
church.
heard they wasn't there some kind of agreement signed between the Pope and.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're actually building a place for them all to.
And that's what he means by
together.
the Children of Abraham.
Okay.
The three.
The three main three religions.
Is that what the author of Hebrews means?
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
Well, tell us what it means.
Goodness, Paul actually defines what it means to be a child of Abraham. So I kind of took Romans 9. So not everyone who is of Israel belongs to Israel.
Mm.
It's not the children by
Roman 9, 6, 8 through 8?
Mm-hmm. It's not biological
Right.
children.
Jesus says that
so
too.
it's not. Yeah, that's right.
They say, we have Abraham as our father. And he's like, oh, really?
Right.
You have your father, the devil.
Right.
If you were Abraham's offspring, you'd do what Abraham did.
Yeah, so we don't want to go the dispensational route where all Jewish people are the offspring of Abraham. That's not the New Testament definition of the offspring of Abraham.
Or Jesus's, yeah.
Even if they're biological,
Yeah.
right? And then I went to.
But if you read Paul with a hermeneutics of suspicion, like we dealt with last Friday,
right,
yeah. Jesus says the same thing though,
right?
As always, Jesus and Paul are in agreement,
right? Then I went to Romans 2, verses 28 and 29, where a true Jew is not one who's been circumcised outwardly, but circumcised inwardly.
Mm-hmm.
So by regeneration,
the heart,
right? But then Galatians chapter 3, Paul just gives us a definition of what it means to be an offspring of Abraham. He says in chapter 3, he says, if you are Christ, if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring. It doesn't get any clearer than that, right? I don't know where some people who like to say that, Israel is God's chosen people, so we just need to do everything to, support whatever the Jews do. Where they get that, they must have just completely ignored Galatians. He says that those who are of faith are the sons of Abraham.
Faith in what?
Faith in Christ. That's what verse 29 says. If you're Christ, if you belong to Christ, if you have faith in Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring. So, what the author of Hebrews is saying is that Jesus doesn't help the angels; he helps the offspring of Abraham. He helps another word, little trigger word here, the elect.
Oh,
right. I know. Well, I mean. It is Reformation Month.
Where's my Erie button? Do you remember which one of these it is?
I have no idea which one.
This is for those that are not quite there yet. Is it this? No, that's not it.
What's wrong with you people?
That they would say that to you.
Right.
No. No. I think I removed it and put on the. I think I removed it. Remember, there was that one that was like a scary sound.
Yeah.
The elect scary sound.
That's right.
Got to get that one back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
the offspring of Abraham are the elect. These are God's people, predestined before the foundation of the world, that Jesus helps by his death. He actually saves them. This is election. It's limited atonement. It's perseverance of the saints. It's all there.
So if someone you threw the word limited atonement out. That's the one that usually makes people start twitching the corner of their eye.
Yeah.
Everyone limits the atonement though, right? In some capacity.
Yeah.
So usually I think how people would believe this, they would say Jesus in his role, which we'll get into high priesthood language here in just a sec. I think it'll help us fit there. They'll say Jesus died and he just made a provision, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like you're tied up to the train track and he's like, hey, don't you know that I died and got the key to unlock that?
Yeah.
Let me call out the code to you, and so you can input the code. And then people are like, you know what? I think I can survive getting hit by a train. And they're just like, whatever. And so they're limiting.
Well,
they're limiting the atonement.
It's right,
because they're not universalists.
It's Jesus taking the rope off of you, but you have to get up and
and
get off the track. Right.
It's
the traditional picture is of a man who is drowning in the ocean, and Jesus throws,
a life vest or something.
The life vest. Yeah, you have to take hold of it, right? You have to take hold of the rope, and pull yourself out.
Yeah.
So it's Jesus does 99%. You have to do 1%. That's not the picture that we get here. That's not the picture you get in any of the Bible. He helps. He actually grabs them and rescues them. It wasn't up to Israel to put in 1% to get themselves out of Egypt. God rescues them out of Egypt. God does such a great work that Pharaoh pushes them out and says, "You're not staying here anymore."
When the high priest went in and made a sacrifice for the people, were their sins atoned for or not?
Right.
I think that's the only question you have to ask.
Right.
Who was the high priest making atonement for sin, an actual atonement for the people of Israel? I think most everyone would say yes.
Right.
One time I asked a Orthodox Jew this question in hopes that it would help us get somewhere, but I think he knew where we were going, so he tried to get out real quick.
Yeah.
But that's what I asked him. The high priest of Israel, when he makes an atonement, is it effectual?
Right.
Yes, 100% effectual for the people. And then you just ask, was that atonement made for like the surrounding nations? No.
Right.
And so the high priest language is then
what's
used here of Jesus.
What's interesting, and I would recommend the book, I think it's called Greater Than Aaron, and it is looking at Christ's limited atonement from Leviticus 16 and the Day of Atonement chapter. And what he does is he shows that, like you said, the Day of Atonement, that sacrifice, it's made not for the surrounding nations, but for Israel. But if you pay attention to the language, this is like a high holy day. This is the only other yearly festival that's called a Sabbath. And they're supposed to afflict themselves. They're supposed to fast. So they're supposed to actually pay attention. It's not a day when you just kick back and just ignore what's going on in the tabernacle. You have to actually be trusting in that. You have to be attentive to it. And the language is that anyone that doesn't afflict themselves is cut off from the people. So even in Israel, even in the nation of Israel, the sacrifice, the atonement on the Day of Atonement isn't for everyone in the nation. It's only for those who are actually purposefully putting their faith in that.
Right.
So even those that are actual Israelites,
you mean it's
who don't pay attention, who don't obey, who don't treat this day as holy, it's not for them either.
And I think you see that throughout their entire history. You have people who think they're good just by their birth,
right? And
then you have people who actually are believing by faith,
right,
and the promises of God,
right.
And that's because those people, I think, would be part of the lineage of Abraham's offspring. They're believing the promises of God by faith, like Abraham did,
right.
And so that continues into the New Testament era, but we have a much greater and better high priest.
Right. Yeah. And again, we're connecting the sacrifice with the priestly office of intercession. And everywhere that you see the atonement described in terms of he died for all, it's always tied in with his priestly office. Always. It's interesting. You can't, that the New Testament authors, they don't separate the death of Christ from his intercession. It is linked together, and we see it here in Hebrews that he helps the offspring of Abraham by making a propitiation for the sins of the people, and he's called a merciful and faithful high priest. So his offering, his propitiation, which is sacrificial language, is tied to his role as high priest.
And what does the word mean for those that may not be familiar?
It just means satisfaction for sin. It's an atoning sacrifice that actually atones. So God is angry against sin, which is bad news because you're a sinner. So God's angry with you. But when the sacrifice is made for you, it propitiates God's wrath. So his wrath is poured out on that sacrifice, and he actually is satisfied. He looks at that blood and he says, "That's enough. I'm not angry with this sin anymore." It's that word that's translated as propitiation. It's used in the Old Testament as the mercy seat. Over the Ark of the Covenant. So the high priest, he goes in on the Day of Atonement once a year. He goes behind the curtain with blood, and he sprinkles blood on the mercy seat, and it propitiates God's wrath against the people. So the sins of the people are forgiven.
Okay, yeah.
So that's what Jesus does.
And so then the big application then is, right, Jesus is made like us in every respect, yet without sin. He has become a faithful high priest for us. He's done this great work, but he can also continue in that work in interceding on our behalf and helping us in our life, right? He helps us when we're tempted then.
Yeah.
He can actually really help us.
Right. And I didn't bring this out as much as I wish I would have, and we've talked about it before, and this was, I think this was the greatest benefit of Gentle and Lowly that came out last year. And even further back, Thomas Goodwin's The Heart of Christ. Jesus is still a man. And I think we often forget that. Like he's been glorified. And I don't know if Christians just forget that he took his body with him. Like Jesus is somewhere right now. We talked about this when we talked about the Lord's Supper and why it can't be transubstantiation because Jesus has a body. And so we have to remember he will forever be the God-man. We think about that while he is on earth, he's the God-man, and so he can help because he's experienced the same things that humanity goes through. But even in his glorified state, he's still a man. And he still knows what it's like. He still knows what that temptation was like. He knows what suffering is like. And so he can still help you today in his work as a merciful and faithful high priest. He still can help you today because he's still made like us in every respect. And so there's no sense in which we can say, God doesn't know what I'm going through. You have a merciful and faithful high priest who actually does know what you're going through, because he's gone through it too, to a greater degree because he suffered when tempted. You and I, we don't suffer when we're tempted very often. We usually gladly give in to temptation, so we don't know the full weight of every temptation because we've actually given in. Jesus knows the weight of temptation because he's been tempted like we have, and yet he never sinned. He never gave in. Yeah, he never gave in. The temptation here in particular is the temptation of falling away. But there's a sense in which Jesus can help you in every temptation, but particularly here,
people might even say they would say, I could see them saying, "Well, Jesus never had the temptation to fall away."
Right.
I'd be like, "No way! You better go back and read."
That's
the
right. You better go back because
in
the wilderness for 40 days, the devil came and tempted him with falling away. you don't have to go to the cross. I'll give you all the
I'll give you
all the kingdoms
right now.
Yeah, all you got to do is bow down.
Yep.
What do you think that was? That was the temptation to fall away.
Yep.
You don't have to suffer. That's the same thing that they're being tempted with.
Yeah.
You don't have to suffer. All you got to do is go back. All you got to do is abandon Christianity and go back to the temple sacrifices. It's the same thing. Just go back. It's just as good. That's the same temptation that Jesus experienced when Peter rebukes him. Says Jesus says, "I'm going to go and die." Peter says, "No, you're not." What temptation is that?
Yeah,
that's the temptation of falling away. And then in the garden, when he's sweating drops of blood. He's again, this is not superficial. When he prays to the Father, if at all possible, may this cup be taken from me. That's not superficial.
Right.
He is expressing a desire not to have to suffer. He's tempted in that way, and yet he finishes his prayer by saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." He knows what it's like to be tempted to fall away, and he never fell away, and so he's able to help those who are being tempted to fall away. And that's good news.
Yeah.
But he had to, but again, he had to be made like us so that he could experience these things like us. He experienced temptation, he experienced suffering, he experienced death, just like us.
Yeah.
And he overcame, and so he's able to help us. And I don't know how they would have done it, but the word help in verse 18 is different from the word help in verse 16. So it's translated as help in both places, but they're different Greek words. In 16, it's that idea of grabbing hold of. In verse 18, it's running at the cry for help. So when you cry out for help, you can know that your merciful and faithful high priest is going to come running. And that's
good.
That's encouraging. That's encouraging for us.
I like that imagery.
Yeah.
He comes running for your help to help. He's not just like, I'll get there in a minute.
Right.
Right. He's out. He's coming.
And so we're encouraged to cry out for help.
Right.
So often I think that we just try to push through. We try to do it in our own strength. Christian, you are not expected to do it in your own strength. You have a merciful and faithful high priest who will give you strength to endure. We need to quit trying to, Clint Eastwood, in a Western,
right.
Right. Trying to just endure all of this, beaten and bloodied, but hey, I'm still standing. Like that's kind of this Americanized idea. We're not called to be the John Wick of Christianity. We're called to cry out for help because we are weak and we're not able. But the good news is, the encouraging news is that we have a God who has provided everything that we need.
That's good. All right. That's great. Good stuff. All right. Thanks for listening today or watching to the podcast. And hopefully this has been a great help and benefit to you as we've now gone through Hebrews chapter 2. And so we'll take a break from Hebrews. I'll be back in John for 5 weeks, probably. We'll see how it goes. George and
we'll see.
Philip have a bet, apparently.
We'll see
how long I'm going to go. But I'm going to try to finish the book out before the end of the year. So John will be wrapping up. We'll be back in John chapter 19 next time. So come back for Free for All Friday. Be coming out this Friday and every other Friday. So hopefully this has been a benefit to you. If it has, please like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you next time.